These are a couple of articles that were published last year, but it has to do with polyvagal theory that I think is really helpful. Polyvagal theory in the playroom, being able to attend to your kiddos, for those of you who do play therapy, is important, and we'll talk about what that looks like as we get into the meat of the presentation. Also, think about when we can't send energy and information through our face because we're wearing masks, how does that impact therapy? I'm not bashing masks. I'm not getting political. I'm just saying when you cover your face and you can't see those facial expressions, just like I can't see yours, and have that attunement that can happen between two people, it's like something's lost. And I hear that from a lot of people, that they felt like when they were doing therapy, something got a little lost with the mask on. And I think that's because we're really engaged, and brain science shows that, to look at people's uh, uh, facial features and reactions as they, even in microseconds, as people are trying to communicate with one another. So let's start with discernment on this three-tiered slide here. Discernment is good judgment. We use perceptions of the world around us to form conclusions. Neuroception is detection without awareness. So I want to make sure that's really clear. Neuroception is detection without awareness. And so we talk about perception a lot. Perception's really what we're working with when we're talking about using CBT in theory, and therapy rather. But neuroception describes the way that the autonomic nervous system takes information in without involving the thinking parts of the brain. And this is something that I hadn't thought much about in my training programs. I'm always thinking like the mind is king, the mind rules everything that's going on. As we know, with the brain and gut connection, like there is something going on in our guts, there's something going on in our bodies and our hearts. And polyvagal theory says that there's this connection that happens between our facial features and our heart that really reminds me of the spinal cord and its relationship to how we automatically, reflexively respond to things. So if you remember back to like Psychology 101, we touch the hot stove, we withdraw our hand from the stove, but we don't have to think about, oh, gee, my hand's hot, and then withdraw our hand from the stove. The signal, you've got the afferent signals coming in, telling our body we are in pain here, and that to the spinal cord, efferent signals back to the hand to make it jerk away. What if something similar to that's happening with our ability to read social cues? And that's what neuroception is proposing, right? I'm saying it in a much more colloquial way, but neuroception is detection without awareness, and we're detecting people's presence of safety or danger before we even think about it, before that information even goes to our minds. And so I think about that when I'm with my clients and the implication that has for first impressions with meeting clients and with getting them to stay engaged. So neuroception responds to cues of safety and danger inside the body, but also outside in the environment and between people. So when we think about danger inside the body, that's where people use mindfulness to help understand more about their body, looking inward, but also understanding and detecting threats outside in the environment. And sometimes those connections, just like with Pavlov's dogs, they make a connection that may serve us well in the moment, but then later on in life, those connections don't serve us well. And so that's what we're finding in counseling. This worked for you at one time. This operated as a safety or protection mechanism. It's different times now, and it doesn't work. It doesn't fit. So being able to match the heart and mind is very important tenet of polyvagal theory, that we're able to be congruent with ourselves. So we can tune into what happens in our own nervous system. We can never assume what's happening in another person's nervous system. So that's just being more respectful about me making an assumption about what's happening in somebody else's nervous system. I just have to be responsible for myself, but then also think how my nervous system could be impacting the outside world around me. It's our responsibility to know what's going on in our nervous systems. We should be curious about what's happening inside of others. Um, I love that. It's our responsibility to know what's going on inside of our nervous system. All right. So another book that I wanted to share with you, and this moves away from polyvagal theory, but it's very much connected and associated to it too, I think. So this is it's going to cover it up, but I've got a picture of it there on the screen, The Transforming Power of Affect by Diana Fosha. And many of you are probably familiar with her models, but I thought this quote just fit really well with what we're talking about in this presentation. Signal affects reflect a reading of the emotional environment in which the likely outcome of self-expression is anticipated. What began as full secondary affective reactions, shame, pain, helplessness, fear, or alternatively hope, excitement, gratitude, trust, eventually become experienced only partially or minimally through the signal psychic threat, red signal affects, or safety, green signal affects, and we'll talk about what those are. Intrinsic to signal affects such as anxiety or hope is the process of appraisal and what Lazarus calls cognitive emotion focused coping processes. And I want to also add into that, yes, and neuroception. So not saying neuroception trumps what Lazarus's work is doing or what anybody in CBT model or modality is doing, but in addition to that, let's add that in there, because what people are experiencing in my facial features and the way that I'm expressing affect right away is going to have an impact on the client. So let's talk about signal affects and what those are referred to in the book. Red signal affects, when living in not good enough emotional environments, establishes an association between core affective experiences and disastrous consequences. The threshold for experiencing the environment as unsafe drops, and emotionally loaded situations more readily trigger red signal affects. Those are things like anxiety, shame, emotional pain. Green signal affects are having one's needs met with responsiveness, and the success and feeling and dealing that follows leads to facilitating affects, which turn to produce green signal affects. These encourage more open and less defending experiences. So things like hope. And so always paying attention to those signals that we get from clients, which the signals, yes, they're taken into our minds and we use our perceptions to have discernment. We also have this roundabout route that's taking place too with neuroception and discernment.